Hello, this is Dr. Harriet Fraud with Capitalism Hits Home. I've missed talking to you. I'm glad to be back. We are brought to you by Democracy at Work, a vibrant organization, a nonprofit, and we hope that you will join us, that you will go to www.democracyatwork.info, where you can join us, where you can see all the merchandise we have, where you can get all the wisdom we have to share. So please do it, www.democracyatwork.info. Also, I want to thank you before we even begin. I want to thank you for tuning in. I want to thank you for caring. I want to thank you, if you can, for sharing this program, and if you're so inspired, and we hope you are, for sending money to support us, because we are in a capitalist system where we all need money. So, thanks a lot. Today, I want to talk about the effect of two things in the United States. One is, and I should say parenthetically, they're both being denied, although they're blatantly obvious. One is the decline of the American empire, and the other is the decline and dissolution of what was the American family. And so both of those things are denied, even though they're very real. And what I want to address are several questions. One is, what happened in the U.S. empire? Why did this happen, and what's happening? Also, what's happening to the nuclear family in the United States? And why did its dissolution happen? Well, I also want to talk about how the American people cope with both the dissolution of their empire and also of their family form. I want to see where people's upset goes, how it expresses itself. And I want to see and try to figure out, where does American public outrage go as suddenly basic supports for them in the American dream, in the ideas of our country that we've had, and of our supremacy that we've had? Where does the anger go that that's taken away? Also, where's the public protest? Other countries protest. They tried to up the age of the French guaranteed pension, and 4 million French people were in the street. Where are the Americans? As their livelihoods are being taken away, as their rents are going up, as they're struggling hard. Where's the movement? Those are all very important things to talk about. So first, I want to address what happened to the American empire. Why is it dissolving? Well, first place, we have to understand that all empires rise and fall, whether it's the Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the British Empire, and now the American Empire. They all rise and they all fall. And so we can't be all that shocked that the American Empire, that emerged fully and strongly after World War II, about 77 years ago, is now falling. Now, what has happened? Well, the first thing we have to understand is that the United States is being replaced by China. How did China get to be so strong? After all, after World War II, America was the only nation not invaded, the only developed nation with all of our production possibilities intact, with our nation intact. China was decimated. They were one of the poorest countries in the world before that, and then they had a civil war after World War II, and only became what they are now, or started to, in 1949, when the U.S. empire was already going strong. What happened? How did they get to be so mighty? We have to look back and see, look, after World War II, there were two countries that won that war, basically, even though France participated, England participated, and they were Russia and the United States. Now, Russia was decimated by World War II. They lost 30 million people. 30 million people died, and there was hand-to-hand combat between the population and Nazi soldiers in the streets. 30 million people. The United States lost 415,000 people. That's a whole lot less. And our production apparatus was not touched. So even though we both won, and the world was carved up into Russian influence and the U.S. influence, the Russians were decimated. The United States was king. Also, the U.S. dollar was the strongest currency in the world. And the rest of the nations in the world kept in their treasuries U.S. dollars for immediate use and U.S. Treasury notes as savings. No one else's currency came close. Well, now China has emerged. It's the year 2023. And look what's happened since World War II. The Chinese gross domestic product, all the stuff they produced, increased by 4.9%, almost 5% increase in 2023. The United States GDP, all the stuff we produced, rose 1.3%, closer to 1%, versus China's 5%. That doesn't look good for America. In China, the inflation rate that hurts the people's purchasing power rose 0.7%, less than 1%. In the U.S., the inflation rate that makes our goods less valuable and people more in trouble when they try to access them and hurts our purchasing power, our inflation rate went up 4.9%, almost 5%. These are indications of China doing a lot better, becoming the new world leader instead of the United States. China is part of BRICS, an economic alliance between Brazil, this is what BRICS stands for, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. They have 12 nations waiting to join BRICS. Two of those nations are Argentina and Nicaragua, which will make, when they join, it will make the overwhelming majority of South Americans be in a Chinese-led economic alliance rather than a U.S.-led economic alliance. South America was totally dominated by the United States previously. Now it isn't. Saudi Arabia, these are the signs that we are losing our empire. Saudi Arabia, which was really beneath America's influence, was asked by Joe Biden, our president, to increase their oil output because they're such a strong oil producer, so that the oil prices would go down. Because we were sanctioning Russia, and Russian oil is much in demand around the world. Well, Saudi Arabia just said, no, you can go pound sand. Forget about it. That lessens our sphere of influence. In the year 2000, that's 23 years ago, 90% of all the world's nations kept their reserve currencies in dollars so that they could buy things from other countries using the sound currency of dollars, and they could put their national reserve wealth into a stable currency, the US dollar. Well, it's 2023. Half of those nations have left the dollar as their primary trading currency and their primary reserves. Half in those 23 years. Another example is that because of the war in Ukraine, the United States has heavy sanctions against Russian oil, which used to go out cheaply to Europe and a lot of the rest of the world. Well, the sanctions haven't worked. Russia is still selling as much oil as it used to. It's selling it primarily to India and China, both in BRICS, and they're reselling it at a profit to themselves, so oil prices have gone up. But those sanctions haven't worked. What used to be the mighty U.S. empire put sanctions, which just aren't working. Even our European allies that are contributing arms in Ukraine, Germany, France, other European countries are buying Russian oil. They're buying it from India and China, and they're paying more for it. Even though they're suffering from inflation because they have to pay more for all their energy. They're even sending arms to Zelensky in Ukraine and remain in NATO. So China hasn't totally replaced the United States as the hegemonic or overwhelming power, but it sure looks like it's getting there. Well, how did that happen? After World War II, 77 years ago, China was one of the poorest countries in the world. It had been one of the poorest even before the war, but after millions were slaughtered by the Japanese and their feeble economy was even more enfeebled by a civil war and the Japanese invasion of China. Well, here we look to capitalist greed, which helped them a great deal. At the end of the World War II, American workers were relatively well paid in the manufacturing sector. Their unions had won them through strikes, through privation, often also through death and struggles. It had won them a good wage. In fact, if you were white and male in the United States after World War II for a while, you got what's called a family wage, which was a wage high enough to support a dependent wife who worked for you full-time and support children as well. And between 1820 and the 1970s, each generation of white male-led families did better than the previous one. Their kids who were blue-collar could become white-collar. If they were white-collar, they could become professional. So you could look forward to every generation doing a little better. Well, instead, these firms, instead of expanding U.S. manufacturing, where they were paying up to about $30 an hour to their workers, they decided to decamp. They outsourced the strong union jobs to China, where people earned less than $3 an hour, but were still a disciplined workforce. And China, like the other places where we outsource jobs, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, didn't have ecological restrictions on American capitalist corporations. And they didn't have things like pension requirements or health requirements or workman's comp. And so it was far cheaper for American corporations to set up big manufacture in China, which got our manufacturing wealth. And big investors in that were Americans. So there's a lot of anti-Chinese feeling around, but they became powerful through American capitalists. Even just this year already, they've earned billions. Alibaba, which is the Chinese internet and cell phone was heavily invested in by American companies. They've earned 460 million underwriting Alibaba. American companies are involved, or at least American investment is involved, in an enormous percentage. I think it's 60% of Chinese manufacturing companies. U.S. corporate greed is what contributed to China becoming dominant over the United States, the dominant empire, and the New World hegemon, which means the New World big cheese, as the U.S. empire falls. But that isn't discussed. It isn't even admitted that the empire is failing. People are employing denial, pretending it isn't so, whether they're the Trump MAGA supporters, make America great again, as if by some means they could, which they can't, or just the fact that our news doesn't talk about how we're failing. It's remarkable. It's a remarkable thing. They never mention interesting things like that China has 12 high-speed trains crossing the Chinese countryside. We have none. Uh-oh. At any rate, there's another big institution in America that's also failing, and that's the family, which was the basic institution in the United States that supported people emotionally. And that is crumbling. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, one of the foundations of that family, in fact, a major foundation, was the white male family wage, which allowed for a full-time wife working in your home and dependent children supported. Now, after World War II, America was mainly white. Most Americans were white people. You get 59.3% were white after World War II. Now, I'm sorry, it's not 59% were white, 89% were white after World War II. Now it's 59% are white non-Hispanic people. Big change in our population. But if you were a white man, and the majority of men in our country right after the war were white, you got a family wage. That doesn't happen anymore. Good jobs have been outsourced, mechanized, robotized. White men don't make that, and that was a condition of existence for the American family of the dependent wife and children. It was the white male salary, which allowed for a dependent woman and children. Now, I should say that I don't think that was the greatest family form. It was a stable form, and it was the basic emotional unit for the majority of Americans who were white at that time. I don't think that isolated family is a good idea at all. I think the whole notion that just because somebody is pregnant, just because they got physically pregnant, that whole idea that they could possibly take care of an utterly vulnerable child is bizarre. You only have to look at the newspapers. Every week somebody else has murdered their kid. The figures are for conservatively 2,000 people, 2,000 little children are murdered by their families, to 5,000. That isn't working out very well. And hundreds of thousands are abused. So it's not the best way to bring up children. Plus, it's not the best way to burden parents. To have a child the first year costs, if you look at salary.com or on the internet, over $5,000 a year. And by the time a kid goes to college, for a middle-class family, not poor, not rich, it costs, I think it's $233,000, certainly over $200,000. So one of the things that indicate that family form is breaking down is that fewer people have children. The big trend among married couples is no children. Children are just too expensive and too difficult. Besides, the divorce rate is very high. The legal divorce rate in the 1960s was approximately 25%. Now, the legal separation and divorce rate is a little over 50%, and between 15 and 20% of people just split. They don't have kids to fight over. They don't have money to fight over or possessions. So they make an agreement and just go their separate ways. So you have about 65, 70% of people divorced. And a lot of people just don't bother getting married in the first place. They don't have good figures for who cohabits. But an awful lot of people just live together. What's the point of getting married? They're not going to have children. And what this has meant, particularly for American men, is a disaster. Because men counted on women to do the domestic work, to raise children, to do the emotional work, to connect them to themselves, the social work to connect them to their families, and to connect them to their friends and have them over, and also to do the sexual work. Your wife was always there, and she was willing to be sexual for you. Actually, her livelihood depended on it. And as Kristen Godsey wrote in Why Sex is Better Under Socialism, in that very good book, if someone is holding the purse strings over you, they have a lot of power over you, and one of those powers can be used to extract sex. So that men, mainly men in America, are really feeling lost. Women's primary emotional relationships are often with other women. They're often with children. But men relied on women for their emotional relationships, and they're lost. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, that probably has something to do with the fact that just about every mass murder, and there's more than one a day in the United States now, is committed by a man. Now, one this year was committed by a woman in transition to becoming a man. So that's kind of half there. And they're all loners. None of them is in a relationship. None of them has a caring network around them. So that we have a real crisis among particularly American men. And we will continue talking about that crisis and also the solutions that are there to help us out in our next episode of Capitalism Hits Home. Thank you all for having listened, everyone who did. And thank you all if you suggest this podcast to friends to hear. I was really gratified that since we had a slight lull in these podcasts, I got really good messages from people saying, "Where are you? I count on you every week." Made me feel wonderful. And I want to be there for you every week. And I'd like you to tell your friends about it, hoping they'll like it too. And contribute as much as you can to help us continue with Capitalism Hits Home. Thank you from me, Harriet Fraud, and from Democracy at Work. Goodbye for now. See you next time.